So good afternoon, good early evening to everybody, and I'm Bob Hamilton. I'm the head of Eurasia Research at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the US. I'm honored to moderate a large and distinguished panel here on Ukraine and security guarantees post-war. So I thought I'll take just a couple minutes to introduce the panelists, and then we'll start with an opening question to each of them and then do some moderated discussion. So with me, we have Ms. Olga Reznikova, a researcher at the National Institute for Strategic Studies in Ukraine, Ms. Simona Kojakaru, State Secretary, Ministry of National Defense here in Romania, Ms. Alice Rufo, Director General for International Relations and Strategy, Ministry of the Armed Forces in Ukraine, Mr. Francois Heisbourg, Special Advisor, Foundation for Strategic Research in France, Mr. Alistair Donaldson of the UK's Ministry of Defense, Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges, former Commander U.S. Army Europe, General retired Sir James Everard, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and my colleague Ms. Maya Otarashvili, the Eurasia Program Director at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. So I thought I would ask the panelists as an opening question, and if we could just go down the row with in a couple of minutes, succinctly as possible, why should Ukraine matter to the West? Why should the West care about what happens in Ukraine? So Olga, can we start with you?
Thank you so much, dear Chairman, distinguished guest. I'm very proud to participate in this very important event and represent the National Institute for Strategic Study of Ukraine. Our institute is a partner of New Strategy Center in this panel. It's a big honor to us. I would like to add that our institute has extensive experience in preparing analytical reports for the NATO headquarters. The papers focused on the hybrid threats, to better understanding hybrid threats, hybrid warfare, resilience building, and so on. And coming back to your questions, I would like to say that the ongoing war has fundamentally changed the European geopolitical landscape. The outcome of the war will determine the future framework of the world order. What will rule the world? The force of law or the law of force? This is a question. The existence of Ukraine as a state and as a nation is at stake now. The ongoing war is testing the West's ability to defend democratic values and fight aggression and totalitarian regimes that undermine the rules-based order in Europe. Western countries which have ambitions of global and regional leadership are testing now their leadership qualities. And as it was mentioned in many strategic documents of the EU and NATO, the world is facing the complex threats now, and it's difficult to difficult to respond to these threats by one country alone. We need joint efforts. So the question is about our joint effort. Not only Ukraine should win a war, it will be our common victory. And let's imagine if the outcome of the war is Russia's victory. Ukraine and then Moldova will be occupied, and the EU will have the only neighbor on its eastern border, Russia. So if some people in Europe think that Ukraine is far from their home, it's not, this threat is not so important for them, let's think about Russia on the eastern border of the EU. I think this distance will be shortened very fast. So I can only repeat that the outcome of ongoing war is our common job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so delighted to be this afternoon with you in such a distinguished panel with old friends of Romania and of this forum, and with the first time ever with Alice Ruffo, the General Director in the French Ministry of Defense. I'm really very, very happy to be here. So the answer is very straightforward from myself. Peace in Ukraine is peace for Europe. So this is crystal clear, and the future of Euro-Atlantic security is at table in Ukraine also, and that's why we are very much, strengthening our support for Ukraine. This is of strategic interest of Romania, and because strengthening Ukraine's security means strengthening Romania's and Europe's security, and this is absolutely very, very much important. And we are thinking that a just and enduring peace in Ukraine is the sole guarantee for a safe and secure future of the Euro-Atlantic community, as well as global international community. Is also very much linked to not only to the security of Europe, as I said, but to the global security. Why I'm saying this? Because we are looking at Russia's actions. We are looking at Russia as having imperialistic ambitions and objectives that are not confined to the near neighborhood, to Ukraine or to the Black Sea. These are very much targeting, beyond this region, which should be of huge concern for the Euro-Atlantic community also. And I would like also to add that Romania is very much concerned about what the war of aggression, this brutal war of aggression in Ukraine, and as a frontline state, if Russia is going to achieve its objectives, we are going to we are going to receive first the shock waves. So that's why Ukraine matters. Ukraine security and stability matters, and Ukraine victory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy for being there. I was joking because you mentioned the fact that I was from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Well, not yet. I'm from the French Ministry of Defense. Just maybe to concur absolutely to what you said. Why the war in Ukraine and the fact that Russia shouldn't win this war matters to the West. But I will come back. I think not only for the Western world. In a nutshell, first of all, from the beginning, this war was a clear aggression under nuclear rhetoric against a sovereign state. And the objective of the war were crystal clear from the beginning. It was the negation of the sovereignty and even the existence of Ukraine. So we're talking about a war against a sovereign country and free people. This is why it matters. Secondly, because the war didn't really begin 2 years ago. If you look at the past, all the architectures of security we built during decades in Europe were methodically destroyed by Russia. So from the very beginning, this war against Ukraine was a war against the security and the stability of Europe. And we can see it right now. We need to be conscious of that. We can see it in France. We had a lot of interference today, as you know. We have consequences of this war. So it's a matter of European stability and security. Russia we can't help having Russia winning this war, because otherwise, and you mentioned very clearly, I mean, it will be our own security at stake, and if you look at the reality of the situation, it's already the case. And third, because this war was, from the beginning as well, a hybrid world war. I mean, you know, when at the beginning of the war, I was traveling, for example, to Africa or to Southern Asia and so on. And you could see everywhere the narrative explaining that Russia was the one to be aggressed, which is totally, you know, an inversion of everything. So it was prepared by a huge narrative for explaining that this war was a sort of conflict between two countries and that we should find a quick solution because, for example, sanctions were hurting while it was an instrumentalization of the food for weaponizing food issues. So it's a hybrid war all around the world. You can see that there are connections everywhere. And this is not only for the West to care about that. I mean, and this is something I think we should insist on, because what's going on today in Ukraine raises a question of the future of the international order everywhere in the world. So I think this is key, and your question is a very good one, because when you frame the question like that, I think that some countries in the world still think that it's a question for, you know, Europe's stability. We don't care, it's your problem, and so on. This is not true, because it's a hybrid war, because it's already all around the world, the consequences are everywhere, and this stabilization in our neighborhood, basically, and in Europe, will not stop there. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for having me again here in Bucharest. I was here last year. It was a joy to come back to this city, and it's an even bigger joy to be back this time. First of all, this war has had three beginnings. The first one was in 2014. We all know about that. The second one began in December 2021, the so-called security treaties. That was the war against Europe. And if you will remember the discussion between, the public part of the discussion between Macron and Putin on the 7th of February 2022, most of the discussion was actually about the utter incompatibility between Putin's vision, neo-imperial, ratcheting back the situation to what it was at the time of the end of the Cold War. It was hardly about Ukraine. It's very interesting when you look at it. Second point, Ukraine is in very deep trouble. We are not in a good situation. We'll come back to that. And Putin may believe that he has a serious chance of winning the war, of subjugating Ukraine. If he manages to do that, then there is no particular reason why he would feel intimidated in dealing with bite-sized entities, much smaller than Ukraine. Ukraine is larger than France. It's a big place, defended by people who are quite good at defending themselves. But there are plenty of other parts of the former Soviet Empire which do not respond to that description. So yes, the Russians are already testing us on a daily basis. If I just look at the last 2 days, we've had an amplification of GPS and AIS disruption in the Baltic Sea. We had the attempt to press the issue of changing the maritime borders of Lithuania, and Finland. We have had the abduction of the markers on the Narva River between Russia and Estonia. Why the Russians withdrew the markers, I don't know, but it was probably not there was not a kind reason behind it. And we had the revelations in France about who did the latest anti-Semitic operations in France, info ops. So he's simply going to ratchet up. And we are already beginning in that phase. So, to close, if we don't raise our own game, if we continue with the Biden-Jake Sullivan school of self-deterrence and the Scholz version of that, I suspect things are not going to get much better. So your question is unfortunately not academic.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. Particularly good to be in this hotel. There's a famous trilogy of British novels set in this hotel in 1939. And the characters are diplomats and journalists and thinkers and spies. And they gather and they talk about the deteriorating situation in Europe. And they talk and they talk and they drink too many cocktails and they have love affairs and they talk some more. But what they fail to do, and this is the point of the book, is they fail, as the whole of Europe failed in that era, to stand united and with resolve to resist naked aggression. And the lesson of that era, of course, is that aggression against free and democratic countries, however far away in one part of Europe, will inevitably have profound implications for everyone. Now, that is why our Minister for Defence in the UK, our current Minister, I should say, we're in a pre-election situation now, has called the current situation as a result of the hot war in Ukraine a pre-war situation for the whole of Europe. Now, I think that some of the comparisons with the 1930s are easy to make and sometimes a little facile. Of course, the major difference is we now have an organisation that is dedicated to unity and resolve, and that is NATO. And that is why the UK it remains a very strong supporter of NATO, and of course a very strong supporter of Ukraine. And we very much hope that Ukraine has hope and expect that Ukraine has a future in NATO. And so I just want to agree with the other panelists and what they've said so far, that the lesson from the previous pre-war era is that unity and resolve across the free West is absolutely critical if we are going to defend democracy, security, and indeed civilization in Europe. Thank you.
So this war in Ukraine is what failed deterrence looks like. That's why we should care about it, because this is what failed deterrence looks like. We did nothing after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. We did nothing after Russia jumped over President Obama's red lines in Syria. We did nothing after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And I'm glad that Francois reminded us that this war did not start 2 years ago. It started actually in Ukraine more than 10 years ago. And then, of course, you can imagine the Kremlin looking at us in the United States. They see the chaos of January 6th, and for the first time in American history, we did not have a peaceful transition of power. They heard the French president say that NATO was brain dead. They saw Germany was still building Nord Stream 2 deep into 2021. And then they saw the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. You could almost imagine the Kremlin, the guys sitting around the table laughing like, well, let's go ahead and finish the job in Ukraine because the West is not going to do anything again. So that's one reason we should care about what's happening now, because we're paying the price for our earlier failures. Now, when I talk to Americans, not people that come to conferences like this, but regular voters who are asking, I live in Missouri, why do I care about Ukraine? Or I'm from Florida, and my brilliant governor said, well, that's just a regional border dispute. So when I talk to American voters, I say there's three reasons we should care about Ukraine that affect you, especially these MAGA idiots. Number one, it's about our economy. America's biggest trading partner, according to the U.S. Commerce Department, is Europe. And American prosperity depends on European prosperity. And European prosperity requires stability and security. With Russia's attack on Ukraine, we have disruption of food supplies, which affects everybody's food prices, not just Americans. We have disruption of energy supplies, which affects everybody's gasoline prices. And there are millions of refugees in Poland, Romania, and Germany today from Ukraine, which adds a burden to everybody's economy. And General Breedlove coined the phrase after Russia did this with Syria and sent hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees into Turkey and on into Europe, weaponization of refugees. That was not collateral damage, that was an intended outcome. And so that's one of the reasons that American voters and others should care about this war. Second reason, nobody wants a war between NATO and Russia. Nobody does. But if Ukraine fails, it will only be because we allowed Ukraine to fail. It will be on us. And the Russians will absorb hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. So the Russian army is going to grow by 200,000 or 300,000 troops, not volunteers. They're going to be pressed into service, and they'll be used as cannon fodder the way they do their own troops right now as they continue on towards a NATO country or Moldova. I mean, they've said they will. And of course, Romania has said they will protect Moldova. So you're going to have Romanian troops coming into Moldova to protect Moldova. So now you've got a NATO ally. You can be sure that our Polish allies are not going to sit behind the Vistula River and watch as Russian forces keep coming towards them. They know how that movie ends. And so we are going to end up in a conflict between NATO countries and Russia if we allow Ukraine to fail. And then finally, China. All my MAGA friends, I have one or two, they say China is what we should be worried about. Or another strategic genius, Elbridge Colby, China is the only thing we should worry about. Okay, great. Well, then let's beat the hell out of Russia, and that will send them, that not only will that isolate Iran, it will also send a message to China that yes, we have the political will, the industrial capacity, and the military capability, and the alliances to defeat Russia first. And then China will say, okay, maybe what the United States and others are saying about Taiwan and the Philippines and South China Sea, they're serious. Right now, they don't believe we're serious. They absolutely don't believe we're serious. When you have a U.S. Senator, J.D. Vance, who may have a high position if there's, God forbid, a Trump administration, who says we don't have the capacity in the United States to make enough ammunition. Well, what are we going to use against China? And he's from Ohio, where they make Abrams tanks, so he should go around and visit his state more often. And then finally, nuclear deterrence. So far, the only nuclear deterrent that's working is Russia's threat to use nuclear weapons. So our nuclear deterrent is doing nothing for us, and what's happening is showing that Russia's blackmail, that sends a terrible signal to China, Iran, Pakistan, everybody else that has a nuke or wants to have a nuke.
Thanks, Ben. What does the outcome of the war in Ukraine matter to the West? Well, I think big ideas matter. You know, our alliance vision is clear. If you read the preface to the 2022 strategic concept, and I quote, we want to live in a world where sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights, and international law are respected, and where each country, not just the allies, can choose its own path, free from aggression, coercion, or subversion. And I think this vision matters. Yes, I think defeating Russia in Ukraine and the immediate restoration of borders looks like an unobtainable goal in the near future, given the demographic mismatch, the comparative advantages that Russia has in industrial production and in manpower. But this is more than that. This is about the politics of resolve. And I think that resolve is going to be measured in and over years, perhaps even decades. But if we, I think, do not show resolve, if we do not demonstrate, what we mean by our words, then I think we're in trouble. I think the Russian contagion will spread, and I think the alliance is in danger of becoming irrelevant. And I think stopping the Russian rot, it's not going to be easy. It will take principled and bold leadership at a collective level. But as Ben said, I think President Putin believes the West is weak and weakening, full of bluff and bluster. And I think we need to show him that he is wrong. I think NATO is well on the path to doing that. We're not there yet. But we must do so, because a failure to do so would be a false economy. Thank you.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, I would like to thank the organizers of this amazing conference for including us, for inviting us. I'd like to thank the New Strategy Center and George Scutaru specifically for including us in this event. And it's my first time in Romania, but not the last time. So thank you for hosting us. What can I add to everything that has already been said? Ukraine matters because human lives matter, because human rights matter, because genocide is wrong, because people all over the world deserve the right to live and pursue a normal life. Ukrainians have not been able to do that for a very long time. Now, what I said is something very basic, but this basic statement happens to be in direct conflict with Putin's worldview. And that's a very big part of why Putin's Russia has been bullying its neighbors for a very long time. Why this war matters is because it's forcing us, the collective West, to finally look in the mirror and confront our extremely flawed post-Cold War Russia policy. And what I mean by that is what General Hodges beautifully summed up already. All the mistakes we have made with Georgia, with Moldova, with Ukraine before 2022. This is not just about us not helping, but this is also about us letting us, meaning the collective West, NATO, the United States, Europe, letting Putin's Russia get away with actions that coincide with his worldview, right? That big countries, nuclear powers, they're the ones that matter, and the little guys don't matter that much. Now, we say in rhetoric, right, that that's not what we believe in. We say that there are these values we stand for, but specifically in our relationship with post-Cold War Russia, we have shown that we actually go along with Putin's worldview, right? I mean, one very good example of this is why there are no alternatives to Ukraine winning. If Ukraine does not decisively win, what we're looking at is going to be yet another version of what we've had for a very long time in Georgia, in Moldova, in Donbass prior to 2022, in Crimea, right? These versions of so-called frozen conflicts that are not sustainable, that do not enjoy lasting peace. This is not a sustainable solution, but that is the only alternative to a decisive Ukrainian win. Now, here's the key problem that I think we need to confront, and that is we are very happy to say that Ukraine must win, but I don't very often hear people say, especially in the key capitals in the West, that Russia must lose and that we're prepared to see Russia lose, that we're prepared for a world in which Russia has experienced a clear and decisive loss. Now, there's a number of reasons why Western leaders don't want to see a crumbling Russian now empire, why regime instability in Russia may be a bad thing for Western leaders. That should be a separate conversation. I think we should respect the Ukrainians enough that we should not wrap up the notion of peace in Ukraine with discussions about how Russia might be destabilized from within. But when all the other arguments fail, right, the economic, security, stability, whatever, the one argument that's left on the table is, yes, but if Putin's Russia crumbles, the nuclear weapons might end up in the wrong hands, and we would not want that. The nuclear weapons are already in the wrong hands. How many times has Putin threatened use of nuclear weapons and tactical nuclear weapons and nuking not just Ukraine, right? These weapons are already in the wrong hands. I think it's very important for us to look in the mirror and understand that so far we have gone along with our actions with Putin's reality of this great power politics type of world, and not the one that we keep saying we support. A world where small nations and large nations are equal, where human rights matter, where all people's lives matter. I'll stop here, but thank you so much.
So thank you all for those really interesting, fascinating answers. And you all, I asked what appeared to be a one-part question, but I think all of you turned it into a two-part question, which it actually was. As I thought about it, I asked, why does Ukraine matter? And all of you in some way addressed the issue of what does it mean, because Ukraine clearly matters as a country of 44 million people in Central Europe. It matters to European and US security. You addressed the question of what does it mean if Ukraine loses, but also what if Russia wins? Pretty much everyone on the panel had an answer for why that outcome is not in the interest of the EU, NATO, and the United States. So thank you for that. I want to drive right now to the sort of the central question of the panel, which is security guarantees for Ukraine, right? That's what the panel title was. So the question then is, what are the factors that would enable Western security guarantees toward Ukraine prior to full NATO membership? So what can we provide to Ukraine prior to full NATO membership in terms of security guarantees? And in what scenarios do those become possible? So this is explicitly a two-part question. It is, how can we provide security to NATO, or to Ukraine before NATO membership? And then what are the conditions that would enable that? And really, I think what we mean here is, what does the war have to look like on the ground for Western countries to extend security guarantees to Ukraine on its road to NATO membership? So I guess we can go down the line again.
Thank you. You asked a very complex question, and it's difficult to decide what should be first in my answer. I think I should underline why we need these security guarantees prior to full NATO membership. First of all, maybe I have to start with Budapest Memorandum, or yeah?
Yeah, we can talk, absolutely, Budapest should be part of this conversation, yes.
Yeah, because, you know, it was a kind of security guarantee, and this value is worth studying at all courses and training process, because you see, that mistake of Ukraine has costed too much for us. Except we have not only Budapest Memorandum, we have had Minsk Agreement 1 and 2, and also there is a treaty on friendship and cooperation and partnership between Ukraine and Russia, and due to this document, the parties respect each other's territorial integrity and confirm the inviolability of the existing borders between them. It sounds like a joke now, yes. And yes, the membership, the full membership in NATO would be a strong security guarantee for Ukraine, maybe the strongest one. At the same time, we are speaking now how to end the war, and one of the obvious ways is making a new agreement again. Yeah. And what will mean this agreement for Ukraine after Budapest Memorandum, after Minsk Agreement 1 and 2, and what makes sense of signing this new agreement without strong security guarantees. Yeah, and one of the lessons learned from our bad experience is that a political agreement on security guarantees should provide for a clear mechanism for its practical implementation. And what should I add? Facing that existing internal organizations such as the UN and its Security Council are ineffective in conflict resolution. They need a deep transformation. And analyzing the current security situation in the world, I have to say that the possessing of the nuclear weapons seem to be the strongest security guarantee today. What do you think about it? When we signed the Budapest Memorandum, we lost this guarantee. So what will be a new guarantee for us, and which of our partners are ready to propose a strong and effective security guarantees for Ukraine? Which of our partners are decisive enough to implement these security guarantees in practice? And this is a matter of motivation of our partner. And one more important thing is awareness. Awareness of a long-term and complex nature of the Russian threat, not only for Ukraine as existential threat, but the Russian threat is a big threat for for many European countries. One more enabling factor that would shape security guarantees for Ukraine is, of course, a will for partner countries to offer such a security, political will, maybe. And what about motivation? Yeah. The increasingly militaristic Russia lacks the internal capacity for significant change in the nearest future. Therefore, it presents existential threats, as I mentioned. You know that Ukraine's role has been essential in reducing Russia's military potential and would remain in a post-war deterrence strategy. It was mentioned that Ukraine should be a part of deterrence strategy for Europe and maybe for global security as well. And what else? I think that cohesion of our partner country is also enabling factor for shaping security guarantees. Creating a common strategic culture of the EU, for example, will contribute to a better understanding of a common threat and the ways how to respond to them effectively. And making a sound policy toward Ukraine and strategy of concrete actions to assist Ukraine during the war of attrition that we are facing now. This is very important. I think that we need to take into account.
Thank you.
I can continue, but we have a limited time.
So following the line, I will say that the ultimate security guarantee for Ukraine should be NATO membership and also EU membership. But up to then, I think what is absolutely very important is to continue the persistent support by the international community towards Ukraine. And of course, the second part is related very much to reconstruction when the war will end. This is very, very much important. Romania has firmly supported and is supporting Ukraine's endeavors toward full membership. Since I said this should be the ultimate, security guarantee for Ukraine in European Union and the future path in NATO, because, ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine belongs to democratic world. Its place is in NATO and EU. This is absolutely clear. And I will say a couple of words in relation with what is happening right now in relation with Ukraine's future membership to NATO and also at EU level. Of course, everybody is talking about the upcoming NATO summit in Washington mid-July, and this is going to reconfirm our solid commitment towards Ukraine. This is clear. Probably you know very well that allies decided last summer in Vilnius that Ukraine will become a NATO member, and we will help Ukraine to become a NATO member by moving them closer to NATO. We are doing this right now. We are helping Ukraine to move closer to NATO. And membership action plan was removed from the list in relation with Ukraine accession. They could go straight, but when the political conditions are going to be met, they are going to become a NATO member. By then, we are very much focusing on increasing interoperability, on increasing their defense resilience, on helping them with defense reform. This is absolutely very much clear. Also, what I would like to mention here is I see as a security guarantee, if you like, as the most important enabling factor towards this objective, the unity of the international community. I think each and every speaker, in a way or other, mentioned this important strength, unity of the international community for Ukraine against an aggressor which tries to extend not only territorial advances, but its influence. And this is absolutely very much important because we are talking about an aggressor who is trying very much to impose his own rules, to change strategic security balance, and, as I said, the global security architecture. So, persistent, continuous, substantial, and cross-domain support for Kiev is very important right now, as long as it takes. And moreover, the second, as I said, is related to reconstruction, including in terms of defense capacity building and readiness, in a way in which Ukraine could ensure a credible and effective national deterrence posture. I'd like to say a couple of words from how we see the difference, if you like, between Budapest 1994 and 2024. There is a huge one, absolutely. In 1994, the world was facing a new reality. The collapse of the Soviet Union with a new international formula, a series of independent states emerged, seeking autonomy, self-determination, expressing their identity. At that time, Ukraine decided to join a civilized world, to develop economically, to become a modern country. In my view, the signing of the Budapest Memorandum offered Ukraine almost 2 decades of continuous development. On all levels, which culminated, if you remember, with the candidate status offered by European Union very recently, and with the NATO decision that Ukraine will become someday, we hope, very soon, a NATO member. The key lesson from the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994 is that when it comes that Moscow considers some countries as second-level actors, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. So I think it's important, as I said, that I will end this chapter of my intervention, that the sole real security guarantee right now is the support for Ukraine. Moreover, is solidarity, and of course the framework agreements that G7 countries signed or are going to sign with Ukraine. Thank you.
I totally agree with what has been said right now. I mean, maybe just as an introduction to when talking about security guarantee, let's be candid about that. Now, Ukraine is fighting for our own security. So the security guarantee we have is the resistance of Ukraine and the fact that they are fighting for values, you're right, for principle and for the international order and the European order. Obviously, I mean, it's not feasible to explain to Ukraine that, seeing the fact that Russia shouldn't win this war is critical for our own security, and explaining that the future of Ukraine is not in NATO and in EU. The future of Ukraine is in NATO and in EU. And obviously, it will change everything for ourselves as well, and we need to be prepared to that. And this is precisely what you mentioned. I mean, we have had peace because we had agreements. It's not possible today to have negative guarantee of security as it was the case in Budapest, because Russia didn't respect the Budapest Memorandum while violating the sovereignty of Ukraine, and it was not possible to have the Minsk agreement because Russia decided to refuse and reject all the Minsk agreements. So again, and maybe it's candid and it is stating the obvious, but it's Russia that had decided this war, and now Ukraine is fighting for peace. Not because, in these crazy speeches we hear from Russia sometimes explaining that we are making a war to Russia. This is wrong. We are fighting again an aggression. So obviously we need to be prepared. We need to be we need to have interoperability, which was a huge lesson for the war in Ukraine. We need to reinforce that. We made, I'm not optimistic, but I have to say that we made a lot of progress. First of all, there was a NATO enlargement, which was, I think, the first defeat of Russia, because Russia anticipated that we would be divided, and we were not, and we had a new NATO enlargement. So NATO is now stronger. Second, we need to develop the European pillar of NATO within this framework, and we need to develop it even with Ukraine while preparing its membership, because it's a question of security for ourselves. And when we are, signing this security arrangement, the memorandum of understanding, this is a way to prepare that and a way to act concretely, be it in UDCG or in other framework, to boost, this movement that would be the only one that will gives us guarantee for ourselves, for our own security. So at the end of the day, I think building the framework of reinforcing unity in NATO, interoperability and so on, reinforcing the European pillar of NATO, and being prepared for the NATO and EU future of Ukraine is that, again, coming back to your first question, a question of security for ourselves.
Yeah. First of all, I agree with what has just been said, but I would add 2 points. The first is that in order to do the right things in the short term, because you were asking us what can we do now in order to move towards the eventual goal, we have to be clear about what the eventual goal actually is. EU membership, that's quite clear. And actually, the intermediate steps are actually quite easy to describe. Not necessarily easy to implement, but they're easy to describe. When it comes to NATO, I wish that there had been a universal interpretation of what was decided in Vilnius. Madame, you said a few minutes ago that we decided that Ukraine would eventually join NATO. The mood music around Vilnius was quite different in Berlin and in Washington from what it was in most other capitals. And I still remember at the time the Americans, beginning with the president, continuing with Jake, was about the Israeli option. It wasn't about NATO. The Israeli option, which had to have a bilateral or a set of bilateral relations in the long term with consistent and continuous military assistance. And this, of course, was before the 7th of October, so it could actually have been seen as a viable proposition. Of course, we haven't heard about it since 7th of October. Jake Sullivan all of a sudden discovered that the Middle East was not a good model for what was going to be done as an end state for Ukraine. So when it comes to NATO, we have to mean what we mean. And I'm not sure, that Mr. Trump shares that assessment, by the way. I don't know what Mr. Trump actually believes when it comes to eventual Ukrainian membership of NATO. I haven't heard him express himself on this, and he may be elected. And as for the governments in Berlin and in Washington, I would like them to be quite as clear on this as other capitals are. That's the long run. In the short term, it's about winning the war. And it's a long war. And here we have to get back to basics, things which have just been said, interoperability, etc. All of this fundamental, and we're doing it, and we can pride ourselves on some of the things that we are doing. But we are not making it possible for Ukraine to win the war. Not with our model of self-deterrence. Let me remind you of what it means. No foreign forces in Ukraine. That was the first step. It was actually Biden before the war began. Secondly, it was no crude weapons, only individual weapons. Then it became no tanks. Then it became no combat aircraft. Then it became no targets in Russia, and so on and so forth. Now, it's not simply that many of these self-denying ordinances were basically wrong, and indeed many of them have been lifted after a number of thousands of people uselessly lost their lives, but we also gave something to the enemy for nothing, getting nothing in return. You tell the enemy what you're not going to do, that's a very precious thing to know. And that is the model which still prevails in the most important country. And that leads me to two final points. The Europeans. We, of course, we have to raise our game. And indeed, we saw during the first 4 months of this year what happens when the United States of America no longer delivers weapons to Ukraine. The situation on the ground has been terrible, and it has also proven to be very difficult to get back on track in terms of rebuilding the logistics, in terms of rebuilding the kill chains, and so on. And it's being paid in lives in the Donbass and in the Kharkiv region every day. And we discovered something which unfortunately we knew, but it's always unpleasant to have it be proven in reality, and that is the Europeans were not in a state to replace the Americans. The United States of America gives about half of the military aid which Ukraine has received since the beginning of the war. The other half is Europe, and it'll take us time in order to eventually make up for what to me is an inevitable American shortfall. A Trumpian shortfall, which may be catastrophic and sudden, and a more progressive one, a gradual one under some other administration because of the calls of East Asia. I mean, I disagree heartily with Ulrich Kolbe, and those who follow me on Twitter have been able to regale themselves in our sparring on this. But the fact is, it's bloody difficult to fight in two theaters simultaneously when you have not rebuilt your defense industrial base, and the American defense industrial base is barely in better shape than the European one, which is also an interesting discovery. How many shells does the United States produce today for 155 millimeter cannon? The answer is about the same as Europe. Now, who would have thought? And they may actually hit the same targets in 2025 that we Europeans are aiming for. Now, if you tell me the United States has an enormous treasure chest in terms of defense industrial terms, today it doesn't. It'll also take time for it to deal with two theaters, more or less simultaneously. And this is a big problem. And the last point, Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, the victory of Ukraine depends a lot on our help, but it depends first and primarily on the fortitude, the organization, the willpower, and so on, the skill of the Ukrainian people and of Ukrainian soldiers in particular. The mobilization system has still not been fit for purpose for a long war. The dispute between Zaluzhny and Zelensky was a serious dispute, an important dispute, and it was apparently dealt with pretty much as a problem of insubordinate conduct, a MacArthur-type problem, if I can put it that way. But the dispute was actually very real, and the real issues, for the moment, have not yet been satisfactorily resolved in the Rada. And if Ukraine does not manage to do that, that will also be a problem vis-à-vis securing a long-term security guarantee.
So I think I completely agree with the comments of the panelists so far. As I say, the UK sees Ukraine's future as in NATO, and we support what we like to describe as Ukraine's inevitable and accelerating journey into NATO, which we will continue to lobby our partners and allies to support. But in the meantime, I think we see the support for Ukraine while it's on that inevitable accelerating pathway as coming under three headings: membership, money, and mission. So there are those discussions about membership and how we get there, and as Simona has already said, we've already moved beyond a membership action plan. We are contributing significant amounts of money to Ukraine's security and its reforms. And we are now pushing for a NATO mission to give direct practical help to drive the kind of interoperability and capabilities and training for Ukraine's heroic forces that it will need as it goes on that pathway. And I think I've only got one other thing to add to that, which is, and this is a personal view, which is that while we wait for this, what we say is an inevitable conclusion, but we don't know exactly when, thinking about Ukraine, but also perhaps thinking about other vulnerable partners that have unwanted Russian troops within their borders, it may be that we will have to think more creatively and quite quickly about a more flexible suite of security guarantees for those countries, and perhaps even for clearly defined areas within those countries that ask for them, as long as they meet the standards to the satisfaction of the allies giving those guarantees. And I think that those kind of questions and conversations are going to be extremely important, and we need to start having them openly now.
So anybody that thinks that there is a security guarantee for Ukraine other than NATO membership is deceiving themselves. There is no guarantee other than NATO membership. So I think we should be very honest in our conversations and communications when people say, well, we need to find a security guarantee until there is no. I mean, we've already talked about Budapest. There were 300 American soldiers in Ukraine until December 2021, and they were pulled out of fear that they might get involved. So even putting troops on the ground is not a security guarantee if you don't have the political will to back it up. So I would be very concerned about anybody, serious high-level people talking about security guarantee that is not NATO membership. So what we should be talking about is how do you mitigate the risk and how do you help deter Russia from making that terrible decision? I spoke at the Munich Security Conference to let's just say, a vice president of a very well-known international investment firm. He said, nobody's going to invest money in Ukraine, not real money, if they think that the war is going to resume. So, in other words, negotiate a settlement where Russia still holds Crimea. Nobody's going to put money into helping Ukraine rebuild. They'll never be able to use Mariupol or Verdansk, even if they're liberated, because Russia will still block access to Azov Sea. So anything short of defeating Russia means there is not ever going to be a real security guarantee for Ukraine. So what do we do about it? First of all, Ukraine is not an island. We always talk about it as if it was an island somewhere. It is on the Black Sea. It has neighbors that are NATO countries, and it has Turkey across the Black Sea that controls access in and out of the Black Sea. So a Black Sea strategy, in my view, would be a way for the alliance and other friendly countries, partner countries, to help deter Russia from making terrible decisions. A Black Sea strategy where the United States and our Turkish ally, we repair our very damaged relationship. And Europe and Turkey repair their damaged relationship. I don't excuse many bad choices by Ankara, but at the same time, we have failed to appreciate Ankara's security concerns. And so they have to hedge a little bit. I think we could be a much smarter, repair that relationship so that they're perhaps more willing to stop the flow of illegal stolen gas and wheat, for example, coming from Russia out through the straits, or ships that are unsafe, improperly marked, not following international law. These are things I think that we could do to help bolster that deterrent effect. We still should put troops on the ground, but let's just don't confuse ourselves that that's a security guarantee, even if there's 5,000 American or British or French soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. There's lots that they can do, but that's not a security guarantee.
So, big political question. It'll be on the agenda in Washington, I'm sure, in July. Ukraine will not get the cast iron guarantee it wants of NATO membership, and all the low-hanging fruit was taken at Vilnius. And so, it's potentially a difficult problem. I think you can't view it in isolation. I mean, I think all sensible people will see there are a number of steps. Step one, give Ukraine the military wherewithal to restore its borders in and over time. And we've heard the problems about the defence industrial base, but we need to press green to go on that. Invest in our own military capabilities, eradicate the major shortfall areas that haunt our own collective defence, and again that comes back to the defence industrial base. Build resilience. We've just been talking about resilience, but we are vulnerable to Russian hybrid activity, and we need to close it out. And lastly, implement the family of plans that our leaders have agreed to endorse for the deterrence and defence of the Euro-Atlantic area. And I think in totality they do give some form of security guarantee to Ukraine, and I agree. I mean, the NATO-Ukrainian Council meets, I think, on the 13th of June. I'm sure they will explore what more can be done to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of military supply to Ukraine, and that will be the basis of an agreement in Washington. I'll stop.
I agree with everything that has been said so far, but I think EU membership, NATO membership, absolutely a must. But before any of that happens, we have to make sure that Ukraine is able to win this war. And Bob, you have spoken about what it would take for Ukraine to win the war, right? Some of it is internal, like forced regeneration, but also more money, more equipment. But one key aspect of this would be that we have to let Ukraine defend itself. Ukraine has to be able to hit targets inside Russia, right? That's just necessary. Again, we have not seen a Western leadership that is willing to bring pain to Russia, to punish Russia. So without that, this is a difficult conversation. And this goes back to what I want to say about what not to do, perhaps, and that is to keep in mind that whatever we do has to be different from what we've been doing with Russia so far. These negotiated settlements, these halfway deals do not work, partly because we are very bad at enforcing them. But I think that's going to be really important. We have to remember that Russia is not just a sore loser under Putin, right? Putin always talks about what a tragedy it was that the Soviet Union fell. Russia is also a sore winner, right? If you think about things like Crimea or Abkhazia, okay, so Russia won, right? Russia has occupied Abkhazia and has locked out the Georgians from accessing it. When was the last time any of you vacationed in Abkhazia? It's scorched earth, right? So not only do they leave, a version of scorched earth behind, but it's also never enough, because Russia is very good at looking for things to complain about. Russia is very good at disturbing peace and just complaining and being unhappy. That's not a way to win anything, right? So again, going back to it, any notion of a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, that will not bring any form of a stable or lasting peace. So I think whatever we do has to be radically different from what we've done in the past, unless we're willing to see Russian expansionism come to a painful, screeching halt. None of this will change, and we will never really have a real opportunity to talk about actual security guarantees for Ukraine. But yes, in my opinion, NATO and EU membership as soon as possible. But we have to remove the gigantic Russian threat factor. Without it, none of that is possible.
So thank you all. It struck me as I was listening to your answers to that question that many of you tackled the issue of sort of what is NATO or U.S. policy vis-a-vis security guarantees for Ukraine. We could all be forgiven for forgetting this, having watched the U.S. and other NATO governments over the last several years, but it was right here in Bucharest in 2008 at the April NATO summit that NATO said Ukraine and Georgia will become members of the alliance, full stop. So it's been U.S. policy, it's been NATO policy since then that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. But again, you could be forgiven for forgetting that, having watched successive U.S. administrations and other NATO countries do very little to bring that into actuality. The last thing I would say, this is not an academic question, security guarantees for Ukraine. General Hodges brought up J.D. Vance. There was an interchange between him and Alexei Goncharenko, a Ukrainian parliamentarian in Munich, where Goncharenko essentially said, if this war ends and we don't have security guarantees, the logical, rational thing for us to do is to go nuclear. And he's right. And not only for Ukraine, but for any smaller power facing an aggressive neighbor that doesn't benefit from security guarantees, that's the logical thing to do. So General Hodges made this point earlier, but I think it bears repeating. You could see the entire nuclear non-proliferation regime start to unravel in the wake of this war. So we only have a few more minutes. I want to give everybody the chance, if you have a final statement to make. I guess I would throw out a final maybe question or theme is, what does a safe, secure, prosperous Ukraine mean for Euro-Atlantic security? And then I'll just, if you would, just raise your hand if you want to answer that one rather than go in order, as we only have a few minutes left. Francois, please.
If Ukraine joins the European Union and NATO, it's a fantastic asset to the European Union, clearly. This is a major agricultural power. It's a major industrial power. And it has and will have one of the most powerful armies within the European Union. In any manner of accounting, you have, whether it's a P&L or it's a balance sheet, you have an extraordinarily positive development. For NATO, it may be a bit more complicated because you are indeed at the end of the strategic tether in geographical terms, and it would indeed require substantial resources, Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian, to ensure that NATO deterrence and defense would be fit for purpose. But it's rather less challenging than West German membership of NATO was during the Cold War. Talk about difficult. That one was really difficult. So yes, it's entirely doable.
Thank you. General Hodges.
Yeah, I wonder, Francois, if French farmers will be as excited about Ukraine joining the EU.
Oh, but they weren't any more excited about getting the Spanish into the EU or the Poles, for that matter.
Okay, thank you.
But you know, they're 2% of the electorate. They make a lot of noise.
NATO gets better the second that Ukraine becomes a member. I mean, they have crushed Russian forces for the last 2 years. We should be praying that they are good enough to help us understand what they have done, that we can learn from them in the time that they have bought us to get our act together. Now, there will have to be a Russia 2.0 containment strategy, and Ukraine is going to be the bulwark of that as soon as they're in the alliance.
Thank you. Simona?
Thank you. I will state the obvious, and I will say that a strong, free and independent Ukraine is vital for security and prosperity in Europe. This is absolutely clear. Economy is key for resilience, and resilience is fundamental for security. And Ukraine, yes, has a huge economic potential also in terms of defense production, not only in agricultural terms, that will bring a significant added value to the European security and defense potential as well. So this is very, very much important. I will come back to what I said earlier on. Ukraine's reconstruction process will envisage profound reforms, you know, and also on economical side of the house. So what I would like to say at this stage is that Ukraine should be part of the European family, as I said, from many, many angles. First, of course, is to have an independent, sovereign Ukraine belonging to the European family, and then the economic energy is going to complete this security aspect of European family, of European club of democratic countries. Thank you.
I don't know how we managed it, but you put the microphone down just as the clock hit 0. So thank you all. We couldn't have planned that if we tried. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. A lot of questions raised here. Look forward to continuing.